The prairie wind blew hard across the open plain, carrying with it the smell of dust and sagebrush, a bitter perfume that spoke of distance and loneliness. Clara bent low against the gust, clutching the thin shawl around her shoulders. 3 days had passed since she had stumbled away from the wreckage of her family's wagon. 3 days of walking with nothing but scraps of dried bread and the half-empty canteen slung at her hip. Her boots, once polished when they left St. Louis, were now cracked soles peeling, the leather stiffened with sweat and dirt. She had thought the West would mean new beginnings. Her father had spoken of land to call their own, of a homestead, where her younger brothers could grow strong and her mother could leave behind the coughing sickness that plagued her every winter. But bandits had come swift and merciless, scattering the train-setting wagons ablaze and leaving silence where voices had been. Clara had run clutching the family Bible and her mother's locket, running until her chest burned and her legs gave out. When she rose again, the world she had known was gone. Now on the fourth morning, her body trembled with weakness. Her lips cracked, her skin tight with sunburn, her thoughts drifting between fever and memory. When her eyes lifted over the rise, she thought she saw a mirage, smoke curling faint from a chimney, a square of fence, the dark outline of horses in a corral. Her heart lurched, both desperate and afraid. If it was real, she had found life. If it was a trick of hunger, then she had nothing left. She pushed forward, stumbling, her breath ragged. Closer, the shapes grew sharper. A barn rough-hewn and sturdy. A small house of weathered planks, lamplight glowing against the dim sky. A tall figure moved near the barn doors, broad-shouldered, leading a horse to water. Clara opened her mouth to call out, but only a rasp emerged, torn from her dry throat. She tried again, her knees giving way, and the ground rushed up to meet her. Boots pounded across dirt. Strong hands turned her, gently lifting her head. "Miss," a voice said, deep and edged with alarm. "Can you hear me?" Clara forced her eyes open. A face swam into view, weathered by sun, framed by dark hair that brushed his collar. Eyes the color of deep water studied her with worry. "Water," she whispered. The man did not hesitate. He scooped her up as if she were light as a child and carried her swiftly toward the house. His chest was solid beneath her cheek, the rhythm of his stride steady, reassuring. "Hold on," he murmured. "You're safe now." Darkness claimed her before she could answer. When Clara woke, she lay beneath a quilt, clean sheets tucked firm around her. A cool cloth rested on her forehead. The room smelled of wood smoke and coffee lamplight, spilling golden across rough-hewn walls. She tried to rise, but a hand pressed gently against her shoulder. "Easy now," the same voice said, softer this time. She turned her head and saw him seated by the bed. He looked younger in the light, perhaps 30, with a jaw dusted by beard and eyes steady and calm. "You're safe here. You need rest." Her throat ached as she croaked, "Where am I?" "Jackson Ranch," he replied. "About 50 miles west of Fort Laramie." "I'm Silas Jackson. Found you collapsed at the edge of my pasture." He lifted a cup to her lips, and she drank cool water, sliding down like a blessing. When her strength returned enough to speak, she whispered her name. "Clara Mitchell. My family. Our train was attacked. I ran. I don't know who survived." Her voice cracked, tears pressing hot at her eyes. Silas's expression darkened, grief flickering there. "I'm sorry," he said, quiet but firm. "The frontier is cruel that way. But you're alive. That matters." "I have nothing left," Clara admitted. "No money, no kin nearby." She clutched the locket at her chest, her last tie to the life torn from her. Silas leaned back, gaze unreadable. "Then you'll stay here until you find your feet again. I won't send you out to die." Clara shook her head. "I don't want charity. Let me work. I can cook sumen. I'll earn my keep." A corner of his mouth lifted, a ghost of a smile. "We'll see about that tomorrow. Tonight you sleep." She tried to protest, but the exhaustion was stronger than her will. As her eyes closed, she thought she heard him murmur something low, almost to himself. No one should fight the dark alone. When dawn broke, Clara found a dress folded neatly on the chair beside her bed. It was worn but clean seams, carefully mended. She dressed slowly, her body still aching, and stepped into the main room. It was simple but orderly, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars, a stone hearth where a fire crackled. Silas stood by the stove, spatula in hand, the scent of bacon and eggs filling the air. Clara hesitated, then spoke softly. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson." He turned, nodded once. "Good to see you standing. Hungry?" "Famished," she admitted. He slid food onto two plates set one before her. Eat first, then we'll talk about work. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of fire and the scrape of forks against tin. Clara felt his gaze on her more than once, measuring, not unkind. When she set down her fork, she gathered courage. "Thank you for saving me," she said. "But I mean it, I will work. I can help however you need." His blue eyes studied her, thoughtful. "You've been through hell. You should rest." "Please," she whispered, pride stiffening her voice. "I have to do something. If I stop, the grief will swallow me." He looked at her a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll find you something to do. But don't push yourself past breaking. Deal." She managed a faint smile. "Deal." The days that followed were a blur of learning and healing. Clara swept floors, mended shirts, and tended the small garden behind the house. Silas showed her the barn, the corral, the cattle grazing beyond. Though he spoke little, his actions spoke enough, steady, protective, never demanding more than she could give. But each night as they sat by the fire, she with needle and thread, he reading aloud from a tattered book, she felt a quiet stirring, a warmth that surprised her. The prairie outside might still be cruel, but inside these walls something different was taking root. And though she could not yet name it, Clara knew her story with Silas was only beginning. The morning sun stretched long fingers of light across the prairie, painting the horizon in soft hues of gold and rose. Clara woke with a start, her body still sore but steadier than it had been in days. For the first time since the attack, she felt the heavy fog of despair thinning as though her mind could catch its breath. She dressed quickly in the worn dress Silas had provided and stepped outside, the crisp air filling her lungs. The ranch spread before her in rugged simplicity. The barn stood weathered but strong, its doors yawning open to reveal tools, stacked hay, and the comforting shapes of horses shifting in their stalls. Beyond lay the corral where a pair of chestnut mares pawed the ground, their coats shining in the early light. Silas was already there, moving with a calm efficiency that spoke of years repeating the same tasks. He noticed her approach but did not stop what he was doing. "You're up early," he said, voice carrying easily in the quiet. "I wanted to help," Clara answered, though her steps slowed as she neared the fence. The sight of the great animals stirred both awe and fear in her. She had ridden before on the trail, but only gentle ponies, tethered by others' hands. Silas glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You'll get your chance. Start with feeding them. Grain's in the bin there. Just mind your fingers." She followed his directions, scooping the grain and offering it cautiously. The horse's warm breath rushed against her palms, startling her, but the animal ate gently, lips tickling her skin. She laughed in surprise, the sound raw but real. Silas's head turned at once, his expression softening, though he said nothing. Throughout the morning, she shadowed him, handing him tools as he mended a fence, watching as he checked the cattle carrying water when he paused to rest. He worked with a quiet steadiness, never rushing, never wasting effort. Clara noticed how even the animals seemed to trust him, moving with ease under his presence. After a time, she paused to catch her breath, wiping her brow. Silas studied her with a practical eye. "You're stronger than I expected after what you've been through," he said. "I've had no choice but to be strong," Clara replied, a bitterness rising unbidden. "Life hasn't asked me what I can bear. It's simply demanded it." Silas leaned on the fence post, his hands rough and scarred. "Out here, that's often the way. The land doesn't care if you're ready or not." His gaze shifted to her, steady as the horizon. "But strength doesn't mean doing it alone." Clara looked away, unsettled by the truth in his words. She had lived on determination since the day she ran from the burning wagons. Letting someone share her burden felt like weakness, yet part of her longed for it. When they returned to the house at noon, the smell of coffee filled the air. Clara insisted on preparing the meal, frying bacon and eggs with a practiced hand, while Silas watched quietly from his chair. She moved with the focus of someone clinging to normalcy, every small task a thread stitching her back to life. As they ate, Silas broke the silence. "Riverbend's the nearest town, 15 miles north. I'll need to ride in tomorrow for supplies. If you'd like, you can send a message, see if anyone from your train made it out." Clara froze fork halfway to her mouth. Hope and dread tangled in her chest. She had tried not to imagine their fates, but now the thought of learning the truth shook her. "I don't know if I can bear to hear it," she admitted. "Not knowing can be worse," Silas said gently. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'll write something. That evening, after chores were finished and the prairie sky bled into indigo, Clara sat at the table with a scrap of paper and pencil. Her hand trembled as she wrote her name, the names of her parents and brothers, the plea for news. When she faltered, Silas set a steadying hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough to keep her writing until it was done. Later, they sat by the fire. Clara mended one of Silas's shirts, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. Silas read aloud from an old book, his voice even and low, filling the quiet room with a rhythm that eased her heart. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way the firelight caught the planes of his face, the steadiness of his hands. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Clara took over the cooking and housework despite his mild protests, determined to contribute. Silas continued to run the ranch, letting her help where she could. Slowly, her body regained strength, her cheeks color. Yet each night when she lay down beneath the quilt, the ache of loss returned, whispering that her life had ended with her family. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the plains, fierce and sudden. The wind howled through the shutters and rain lashed against the windows. Silas guided the animals into shelter, while Clara fought to keep the fire alive inside. When he returned soaked to the skin, she pressed a towel into his hands, scolding him with more force than she intended. "You'll catch your death out there," she said. He gave a short laugh, shaking water from his hair. "Takes more than a little rain to kill me." But when he sat by the fire shivering faintly, Clara draped a blanket over his shoulders. For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude? Yes, but more. Something fragile and dangerous. She turned quickly back to the hearth, her heart racing. That night, long after Silas had gone to his room, Clara lay awake. The sound of the storm outside echoed the storm within her. She owed him her life, but what grew between them was more than gratitude. It was a warmth she feared to name, a hope that felt as perilous as it was precious. And though she tried to bury it, she knew the coming days would only draw them closer. The storm passed by morning, leaving the prairie washed clean, every blade of grass glistening with dew. Clara stepped outside, the air crisp and cool, the sky wide and endless, as if it had been remade overnight. Silas was already at work in the barn. His sleeves rolled, his muscles straining as he hefted bales of hay into place. She paused to watch him for a moment, a strange flutter rising in her chest. When he noticed her standing there, he gave a brief nod and returned to his task as though nothing unusual had happened between them during the storm. But Clara carried the memory with her, the feel of laying a blanket across his shoulders, the momentary brush of his hand against hers, the way his eyes had softened. It frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. She had promised herself never to depend on another again, not after losing everyone she had ever leaned on. That day passed in steady work. Clara cleaned the house from corner to corner, while Silas repaired a section of fencing blown down by the storm. Later, they sat on the porch as the sun fell behind the hills, the silence between them companionable. Clara found herself almost at peace, her grief softened by routine, her loneliness eased by his presence. The next morning, Silas saddled his horse. "I'm riding into Riverbend," he said, tightening the girth strap. "Need supplies. I'll take your letter." Clara felt a knot in her stomach. "Thank you," she whispered, handing him the folded paper. Her hand lingered a moment too long in his, and then he was gone, a dark silhouette against the horizon. The hours dragged. She tried to busy herself scrubbing the table, mending torn linens, feeding the chickens. But every creak of the wind made her glance toward the road. At last, near dusk, she saw him returning, a bundle of supplies tied behind his saddle. She met him in the yard, searching his face for answers. He dismounted, handing her a small envelope. "They had news," he said quietly. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was short, written in the shaky hand of another survivor. Her parents had perished in the attack along with her younger brother, but her older brother Thomas had escaped with a few others and was traveling north. Her heart broke and lifted all at once, loss sharpened by the faint light of survival. Tears filled her eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest, unable to speak. Silas reached out, hesitated, then rested a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for what you lost and for what you found." She turned to him, then her grief spilling over. "I don't know who I am without them," she whispered. He met her gaze steadily. "You're Clara Mitchell. You survived. You endure. That's who you are." She wanted to believe him. But that night, lying awake beneath the quilt, She wondered if survival was enough. Days passed. The ache of grief lingered, but the work of the ranch demanded attention. Clara threw herself into it with determination, tending the garden, learning to milk the cow, gathering eggs. Silas allowed her to take on more, though he watched her closely as if gauging how much weight she could bear. One afternoon, as she carried a basket of vegetables from the garden, she stumbled. The basket spilled carrots and beans, scattering across the dirt. She sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. Silas appeared at once, kneeling beside her, gathering the vegetables silently. "I'm sorry," Clara choked. "I thought if I worked hard enough it would stop hurting, but it doesn't." Silas placed the basket aside, his hand warm against her trembling fingers. "Pain doesn't vanish just because you bury it under chores. It lingers until you face it." She looked at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "How do you know?" He hesitated, then spoke low. "Because I lost two. Years ago, my wife and child. Fever took them. I built this ranch to keep my hands busy, but the ache never truly left. I just learned to carry it." Clara stared, stunned. He had never spoken of this before. His solitude, his silence, it all made sense now. "How do you keep going?" she asked. His eyes were steady, storm dark. "Because stopping means letting the grief win, and I won't give it that." Something shifted between them, then unspoken but undeniable. They were no longer simply survivor and rescuer. They were two souls marked by loss, bound by the fragile thread of endurance. That night, as they sat by the fire, the quiet between them was heavy with things unsaid. Clara stitched a tear in his shirt, her fingers brushing the rough fabric. Silas read from his book, though his voice faltered more than once. At last he closed it, setting it aside. "Clara," he said, her name rough on his tongue. She looked up, startled. He rarely used her name. "Yes." He studied her face, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "You don't have to keep proving yourself to me. You've already shown who you are. Strong, stubborn, alive." Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, afraid of what he might see in her eyes. "And you, Silas, you've shown me what it means not to give up." The air thickened with the weight of their words. Neither moved, neither spoke. Yet something in the room shifted, fragile as the flame flickering in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside the cabin a new storm was gathering, one that neither of them could ignore for long. The following week brought with it a strange stillness across the plains. The prairie stretched endless and quiet, yet Clara felt a tension beneath the silence, as though something unseen waited at the horizon. She tried to bury the unease in work, tending to the chickens, scrubbing laundry on the washboard, kneading bread with sore hands, but it lingered like a shadow that would not lift. Silas noticed, though he said little. His watchful gaze followed her more closely, and his trips into the far pasture grew shorter, as if he did not want to leave her alone for long. One afternoon, as Clara hung linens on the line, she heard hoofbeats, fast and reckless. Her heart leapt. Silas stepped out of the barn, already reaching for the rifle propped near the door. A lone rider thundered into the yard, a dust-covered boy barely older than 17. "Mr. Jackson," the boy shouted, sliding from his saddle. "Bandits hit the Riverbend stage this morning. Folks say they're heading south, maybe this way." Silas's jaw tightened. "How many?" "6, maybe more. Armed." The boy swallowed, hard eyes darting to Clara. "They say they are the same ones that hit a wagon train last month." Clara's breath caught. Her mind flashed to the fire, the screams her family torn away. She gripped the edge of the laundry tub to steady herself. Silas's voice was calm, but his eyes darkened. "Thank you, son. Ride back and tell the sheriff I'll keep watch here." When the boy galloped off, Clara turned to Silas, panic rising. "What if it's them? What if they come here?" He laid a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas checked the shutters, secured the barn doors, and brought the livestock into the corral. Clara helped where she could, her hands trembling as she carried buckets of water, gathered food, and stacked kindling. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky blood red, the cabin felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Inside, Silas set the rifle by the door and lit a single lantern, its glow casting long shadows. Clara sat at the table, clutching her mother's locket. "I can't face them again," she whispered. "I won't survive it twice." Silas knelt before her, his rough hands covering hers. "You're stronger than you think. You've already survived what would have broken most. If they come, we fight." Together. She met his gaze, storm-blue eyes steady against her fear. For the first time, she believed him. Night fell heavy. The wind carried faint sounds from the distance. Hoofbeats, laughter, the crack of a gunshot far off. Clara's heart pounded with each noise, every creak of the cabin making her flinch. Silas sat near the door, rifle across his knees, his posture patient, unyielding. Hours passed. Clara dozed against the quilt, jerking awake at every gust of wind. Then, sometime past midnight, a new sound split the dark. The unmistakable snort of horses, the crunch of boots in dirt. Voices low and mocking drifted through the night. "Lights on inside," one man drawled. "Bet he's got something worth taking." Clara froze, breath trapped in her chest. Silas rose silently, motioning her back from the window. His finger pressed to his lips. The door rattled, a fist pounding. "Open up, old man, we're thirsty." Silas lifted the rifle, his voice low but carrying. "Move on, nothing for you here." Laughter answered, harsh and mean. "We'll take a look for ourselves." The door shook under the blow of a boot. Clara stifled a cry, clutching the edge of the table. The door burst inward, lantern light spilling across the figures that crowded in. Rough men, faces shadowed by hats, pistols gleaming. The leader stepped forward, scar cutting down his cheek. His eyes landed on Clara, and his grin spread slow and cruel. "Well now," he drawled, "look what we found." Silas moved between them, rifle raised. "Leave. Now." The scarred man chuckled. One rifle against 6 guns, brave but stupid. The standoff stretched, tension thick as rope, ready to snap. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She remembered the flames, the screaming, the way her father fell, and something inside her hardened. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth, stepping to Silas's side. The bandits laughed again, but there was a nervous edge to it now. "Seems a little lady's got spirit," one sneered. "Spirit's not enough," another muttered. Silas's voice cut through sharp as steel. "Maybe not, but she's not alone." For a moment, silence hung. The scarred man's grin faltered. Then with a growl, he spat on the floor. "Not worth the bullets. We'll find easier pickings." He turned, shoving past his men. One lingered, eyes glinting with hunger as he looked at Clara, but a sharp glance from Silas sent him out the door. Within moments, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. Clara's knees buckled. Silas caught her, guiding her to a chair. She clutched the poker, still knuckles white. "They could come back," she whispered. "Maybe," Silas said, setting the rifle aside. "But they know now this place won't fall easy." She looked up at him, fear and relief warring in her chest. "You stood for me," she said softly. His gaze met hers, unwavering. "I'd stand against the whole world if I had to." The firelight flickered between them, and in that fragile space something new and undeniable sparked to life. Morning came, gray and heavy. The prairie hushed as if holding its breath. Clara rose from the quilt with eyes still clouded by the night before. She had not slept. Every creak of the timbers had kept her awake, waiting for hoofbeats to return. Silas moved quietly about the cabin, gathering supplies into his saddlebags. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked up, calm but resolute. "We can't wait for trouble to come knocking again. I need to ride into Riverbend, warn the sheriff, see what's being done." Clara's heart lurched. The thought of him riding into danger, leaving her behind in the small cabin, felt unbearable. "I'll come with you," she said quickly. Silas hesitated, the line of his jaw tightening. "It's not safe if they're still near the road." "Then it's not safe for you either," she interrupted, surprising them both with the strength in her voice. "I won't stay behind, waiting to wonder if you'll come back." For a long moment he studied her, the weight of his gaze steady and unyielding. Finally he nodded once. "Then we ride together." They set out at first light, Clara perched on Daisy, the gentle mare Silas had saddled for her. The prairie stretched wide and endless, every shadow on the horizon making her heart jump. Silas rode beside her, tall on his stallion Thunderbolt, his rifle strapped across his back. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was taut, threaded with things unspoken. As they neared Riverbend, the town rose out of the dust, a cluster of wooden buildings, a church steeple pointing toward the sky. Townsfolk turned to stare as the pair rode in. Silas Jackson, solitary rancher, and the Eastern girl, who now shadowed his side. Whispers followed them to the hitching post outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hale was a lean man with sharp eyes and a badge that gleamed too clean. He looked up as Silas entered, tipping his hat with a mix of respect and wariness. Heard about the stagecoach raid, Silas said flatly. 6 men, maybe more. They came by my place last night. Hale's brows shot up. And you're still standing. Silas's tone turned iron. They wanted me to fold easy. I didn't. Hale rubbed his jaw, eyes flicking to Clara where she hovered near the door. You should have come straight here. Bandits are my business. Silas's voice was calm, but it carried an edge. Your business didn't stop them from burning wagons and killing families? The room chilled at his words. Clara felt the sting of memory in her chest. Hale's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Later, as they stepped back into the dusty street, Clara felt eyes on her from every corner. Women with baskets pausing mid-step, men leaning against posts. The weight of gossip pressed in. She heard the whispers, a woman alone at his ranch. Improper. Dangerous. Heat rose to her cheeks. Silas seemed to notice. Ignore them, he said quietly. Easy for you, she muttered. They don't see you as the scandal. He stopped, turning to face her. I don't care what they see. What matters is what's true. She held his gaze, something fierce stirring in her chest. And what is true? His jaw tightened. Words caught behind his lips. He looked as though he might speak, but instead he simply turned and began loading supplies into the saddlebags. As they prepared to leave, a woman approached Clara. She was tall, dressed neatly, her face kind but curious. I'm Margaret Wilson, she introduced herself. My husband's the town doctor. May I speak with you a moment? Clara nodded, uncertain. Mrs. Wilson's voice lowered. Riverbend is small. People talk. I don't doubt Mr. Jackson's decency, but tongues wag cruelly where they find chance. You're young, unwed, living at his ranch. It isn't fair, but fairness seldom rules out here. Clara's throat tightened. I work for my keep, that's all. Mrs. Wilson's eyes softened. I believe you. But guard your reputation, dear. It's harder to rebuild than a burnt cabin. She touched Clara's arm gently, then walked away. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Clara's thoughts churned, shame and defiance battling inside her. At last, as they neared the familiar fence line, she broke the silence. They think I should leave. Silas reined in, turning toward her. Do you want to? Her chest clenched. No, she whispered. But I won't ruin your name. He gave a short, humorless laugh. My name's weathered worse than gossip. I don't give a damn what they say. His eyes caught hers, fierce, unguarded. But I care what you feel. Clara swallowed, hard words failing. The air between them thickened heavy with what neither dared confess. When they reached the cabin, dusk had settled, painting the sky in streaks of purple and fire. Silas dismounted, helping her down from Daisy. His hands lingered at her waist, a heartbeat too long before he stepped back. That night, as Clara lay awake listening to the crackle of the fire, she replayed every word, every glance. She thought of the bandits' mocking laughter, the town's whispers, the steady weight of Silas's gaze. Fear still haunted her, but beneath it, something else was taking root. Not just survival, not just gratitude. It was dangerous, fragile, but undeniable hope. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm, but beneath the rhythm, there was an undercurrent Clara could not ignore. Every glance in town, every whisper behind her back, every sidelong look cast at Silas carried the same unspoken judgment. Yet at the ranch, life pressed on. Dawn broke each day with the crow of the rooster, the cattle lowed in the fields, and the chores waited steady as the horizon. Clara worked harder than ever, determined to prove her place was not charity but earned. Mrs. Whitley, an older widow from Riverbend, began visiting more often. She had always been a friend to Silas, offering baked bread or advice on mending. But lately she lingered longer, her eyes sharp as she watched Clara sweep or cook. One evening she pulled Clara aside by the garden, her voice firm but not unkind. Child, I see the way you look at him, and I see the way he looks at you. But if you want to stay here without tongues wagging until they fall out of their heads, you'll need a shield. Propriety, people call it. I call it protection. Clara's cheeks burned. I never meant. I only want to repay his kindness. Mrs. Whitley arched a brow. Then tell me, do you want to leave? Clara's throat tightened. No, this place he feels like home. The older woman softened. Then be wise. A woman's reputation is as fragile as a sparrow's wing out here. It only takes one careless hand to break it. That night, Clara sat by the fire sewing by lamplight, while Silas read aloud from a worn book of Psalms. The words washed over her steady and strong, and she thought of what Mrs. Whitley had said. Her needle slipped, pricking her finger. She gasped softly. Silas looked up, concern etching his features. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," she murmured, but he was already at her side, taking her hand with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed away the tiny drop of red, his touch lingering. The air between them thickened heavy with everything unsaid. Clara pulled back quickly, heart pounding. "I should finish this later." She rose, retreating to her small room. Behind the closed door, she pressed her back to the wood, trembling not from fear, but from the dangerous truth blooming inside her chest. A few days later, Silas announced he would be taking a herd north to sell at market. Clara felt the world tilt. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said, tightening the cinch on Thunderbolt's saddle. "Miguel and Thomas will ride with me. You'll have company here, and Mrs. Whitley has offered to stay at the house full-time until we're back." Relief mingled with disappointment. She nodded, forcing a smile. "That's sensible." Before he mounted, Silas paused, his eyes searching hers. "Will you still be here when I return?" The question caught her off guard. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she managed, "Where else would I go?" Something flickered in his gaze, something fierce and vulnerable all at once. But he only nodded, then swung into the saddle. "Take care, Clara." The days of his absence stretched like years. Clara worked tirelessly, cooking for Mrs. Whitley, tending the garden, even helping with lighter ranch duties. Still, each evening, when the sun dipped low, she found herself standing on the porch, scanning the horizon for a silhouette that did not come. One evening, as she shelled peas by the fire, Mrs. Whitley spoke without looking up. "You miss him." Clara froze. Yes." The older woman gave a knowing hum. "He's a good man, but lonely. Been that way too long. You've brought life back into this place, child. Don't doubt what you mean to him." Clara blinked back, sudden tears, her voice breaking. "But it wouldn't be proper. I've nothing to offer him." Mrs. Whitley snorted. "Proper is what folks hide behind when they're afraid of the truth. And as for nothing, you've given him more than land or cattle could. You've given him a reason to live, Clara. Mark my words." Her hands shook as she set down the bowl of peas. Could it be true? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. When Silas returned at last, the dust of the trail on his coat, Clara was in the garden, sunlight in her hair as she gathered tomatoes. He reined Thunderbolt to a stop, his face weary, but breaking into a smile the moment he saw her. Her breath caught, and she realized just how deeply she had missed him. That evening, after the men had eaten and retired, Silas asked Clara to walk with him. They wandered toward the small creek at the edge of the property, the sky ablaze with sunset. Silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of water and the chirp of crickets. Finally, Silas stopped, turning to face her. "Being away made me realize something," he said, voice low. "I built this ranch from nothing, and I've always been proud of it. But the whole time I was gone, all I could think about was getting back here. Not to the land, to you." Clara's heart thudded so loudly she feared he would hear it. "Silas?" He stepped closer, his rough hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. "I know it may seem sudden, but I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood in my kitchen, half dead, and still demanding to work. Clara Mitchell, will you stay, not as a guest, not as a worker, as my wife?" Tears blurred her vision. She had dreamed of hearing those words and dreaded them all at once. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "Yes. Oh, yes." Silas pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of longing and promise. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying away the last of their doubts. For the first time since the fire had taken everything, Clara felt whole again. The news of their union spread fast across Riverbend, faster than wildfire across dry grass. When Silas and Clara rode into town together a week later to speak with the preacher, townsfolk paused mid-step, their whispers no longer edged with suspicion, but with curiosity, even awe. The quiet rancher who had lived like a ghost for years had chosen a bride, and not just any bride, a survivor whose spirit refused to be broken. Their wedding was small, simple, and honest, much like the land itself. The church was no grand building, only a single-room structure of weathered boards, its steeple crooked against the prairie sky. Yet inside, sunlight streamed through plain windows, casting golden light upon the handful of gathered neighbors. Mrs. Whitley stood at Clara's side, fussing with the hem of her borrowed dress until Clara laughed through tears. Silas waited at the front, his coat brushed clean. his hands clenched at his sides as if only that kept them from trembling. The vows were brief, spoken in voices rough with emotion. Clara's hand trembled as Silas slipped a simple band onto her finger, but when his storm-blue eyes met hers, the tremor steadied. "With all I have and all I am," he said softly, "I choose you." She whispered her own promise, tears trailing down her cheeks. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted into cheers. Afterward, the townsfolk surprised them. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was welcome pies set on tables, fiddles pulled from cases, children darting between legs as the churchyard became a place of celebration. Clara found herself pulled into embraces, laughter rising around her like a balm. For the first time since leaving her family behind in smoke and ashes, she felt truly seen, not as a burden, but as part of something new. That evening, back at the ranch, Silas lifted Clara across the threshold of the cabin. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jackson," he murmured, his voice rough with wonder. The cabin had been decorated by Mrs. Whitley and the ranch hands, wildflowers in jars. A feast spread across the table, candles glowing in the windows. Clara stood in the doorway, overcome. "It feels right," she whispered. "Like this is where I was always meant to be." Silas drew her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then we'll build the rest together." The years that followed proved his promise true. The ranch grew their herds, multiplying the fields rich under Clara's care. Miguel and Thomas stayed on loyal as brothers, their laughter filling the bunkhouse. Mrs. Whitley moved permanently into the small guest room, her sharp tongue and gentle wisdom shaping the household. Children's voices soon echoed across the valley. First came Daniel, bright-eyed and stubborn as his mother. Then Rose, whose laugh rang like music, and little Ben, quiet, but watchful, his father's shadow already visible in his steady gaze. Clara found her hands full from dawn until dusk, cooking, teaching, mending, comforting, but each task was woven through with joy. Every child's smile was proof that her life had not ended with her family's tragedy. It had begun anew here in this place of dust and sun and love. On their 5th anniversary, Silas surprised her. He led her by the hand to the far edge of the pasture, where a new building stood, a small schoolhouse, simple and strong, its windows gleaming in the afternoon light. "For the children when they're older," he said, "and for any others in the valley who need learning." Clara stepped inside, tears blurring her vision. Benches lined the room, a slate board hung on the wall, and shelves waited for books. Her father's dream had been to bring knowledge west, and here it was reborn through her husband's hands. "My father's dream," she whispered. "And yours," Silas said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You've missed teaching. Now you can share what you carry with them." Clara turned in his embrace, her tears falling freely. "How did I come to deserve all this?" Silas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering against her cheek. "I ask myself the same question every day. The morning I found you on the edge of my land, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I never imagined you'd become the center of my world." She leaned into him, her heart full. "That day I told you I could work, sir, but you told me I could rest beside you. And that's what you've given me, not just shelter, not just purpose. You've given me rest, Silas. You've given me a home." The golden light of late afternoons streamed through the schoolhouse windows, catching dust motes that swirled like sparks of fire. Outside, their children's laughter rang across the yard as they chased each other through the tall grass under Mrs. Whitley's watchful eye. Silas lowered his forehead to hers, their breaths mingling. "We've built something beautiful, Clara, and we're only just beginning." And as the prairie wind swept around them, no longer a whip but a song, Clara knew it was true. Out of loss they had forged love. Out of ashes they had built a life. And together they would carry it forward into every dawn yet to come.